Many a tale has come from the dangerous depths of a coal mine. My great-great-grandfather died in a mine explosion near Buchanan, West Virginia in 1907, and my family still talks about it. My great-grandfather was just a child at the time, and the clearest memory he had of his father was watching the sled bearing his body being pulled into their snowy yard. Tragic stories like these have a staying power that lasts while other memories fade. The story in this episode was first recorded in written form by George Corson, a Pennsylvania folklorist, in his 1938 book, Minstrels of the Mine Patch, Songs and Stories of the Anthracite Industry. Grab your hard hat, lantern, and pickaxe, and let's take a trip way down in the mine. I'm Luke Boserman, and this is American Mythology, folklore, history, and the stories we tell. There once was a miner known by the name Oxenryder, or Hudson Rider, who worked in the coal mines of Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania in the 1860s. Unlike his church-going Christian co-workers, Hudson Rider openly bragged that he didn't believe in God, and for that he was shunned. For years, Hudson Rider worked alone, chiseling away at the dark seams deep in the belly of the earth, ostracized from the camaraderie of his peers. He heard their jokes and laughs echo down the shafts of the mine, and the clink of their lunch pails as they sat and ate together. Alone in the darkness, Hudson Rider grew resentful, hardened, and bitter. He vowed revenge on the miners who had mistreated him because he lacked religion. One morning, as the miners were walking along the gangway to work, the fire boss stopped Hudson Rider and warned him that dangerous gas might be seeping into his work area. "You'll find out whether there's a God or not if you go down there and light your lamp," the fire boss said, and the other miners laughed. Anger flared in Hudson Rider's chest. He strode on, heading to his usual work area despite the warning, muttering threats against the other miners under his breath. He ignited his lamp without a second thought. An explosion rocked the mine. Other miners rushed to Hudson Rider's work area and found that he had been blown to pieces. They gathered the scattered parts of his body in a canvas sheet and placed it in an empty mine car. They all agreed that Hudson Rider's death was deserved, and that he was likely changing his ways as he met his maker. "An atheist has met his retribution," one miner declared. Hardly had these words been spoken when a blood-curdling cry pierced the stillness of the mine. The petrified miners all looked at each other, wide-eyed. The voice that rang through the darkness unmistakably belonged to the man whose remains lay in the mine car before them. Terror-struck, the miners attempted to flee, but the mule pulling the car refused to budge. This terrified the miners further, because it was a common belief among men of their trade that mules could see ghosts. They unhitched the mule, and a second was brought to replace it. But this one also refused to move. A third mule also failed. In a final desperate attempt, the men found a blind mule and hitched it to the car. Unable to see the ghost, this animal didn't hesitate to pull the car and its gory contents to the slope leading out of the mine. Legend has it that when Hudson Rider's remains finally reached his cottage, the miners threw his blood-stained clothes onto a rail fence, which instantly went up in flames. Even though he was dead, Hudson Rider's vow of revenge was far from over. On the day of his funeral, his casket was placed in a fine hearse and pulled by 2 horses. As soon as the coffin was secured, the horses refused to move. Again, the old blind mule had to be pressed into service. Hitched to a rickety ash cart, the sightless creature pulled the coffin to a little cemetery along the pike. Before darkness had fallen on that fateful day, Hudson Rider's true revenge became apparent. A fire boss checking the damage from the explosion discovered that the entire coal vein had caught fire. Every attempt to extinguish the flames was unsuccessful, and the mine had to be abandoned. All of the miners were forced to find jobs elsewhere, and the village was deserted. As years passed, vegetation covered the area. The mine lay abandoned for nearly 20 years. Finally, a big corporation took over the old workings and sank a shaft several hundred feet from the original entrance. But the miners of Schuylkill County still remembered the story of Hudson Rider and stayed away. The company, hoping to convince the miners they had nothing to fear, placed hundreds of rats throughout the mine, knowing that miners viewed the presence of such rodents as a mark of a mine's safety. But not a rat remained. Although the company eventually found enough men from outside the county to operate the mine, Hudson Rider's curse persisted in the form of explosions, unexplained accidents, and one disastrous flood, each taking its grim toll of human life. Music for American Mythology is provided by Dwight Diller and Upine Cultural Traditions. You can find Dwight's music at dwightdiller.bandcamp.com. That's dwightdiller.bandcamp.com. All funds generated by the purchase of Dwight's recordings go to Upine Cultural Traditions. Upine Cultural Traditions was established to identify, preserve, and propagate the cultural heritage of the Appalachian region. This is done in a number of ways, such as the developing and publishing of media related to Appalachian arts, crafts, and music, and the sponsorship of events that further these cultural traditions. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to this podcast today on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening right now. American mythology, folklore, history, and the stories we tell.